mental virtue is then in the second stage of its development and is but half complete. The human intellect can then comprehend the fine matters or electricities and their attributes, which are the creating principles of this external world. The period of 3,600 years during which the sun passes through the third 20th part of its orbit is called Treta Yuga. Dharma, the mental virtue, is then in the third stage. The human intellect becomes able to comprehend the divine magnetism, the source of all electrical forces on which the creation depends for its existence. The period of 3,600 years during which the sun passes through the third 20th part of its orbit is called Treta Yuga. Dharma, the mental virtue, is then in the third stage. The human intellect becomes able to comprehend the divine magnetism, the source of all electrical forces on which the creation depends for its existence. The period of 4,800 years during which the sun passes through the remaining 4/20th portion of its orbit on either side of the point nearest the grand center is called Satya Yuga. Dharma, the mental virtue, is then in its fourth stage and completes its full development. The human intellect can comprehend all, even God the Spirit, beyond this visible world. Manu, a great rishi of Satya Yuga, describes in his Samhita these yugas more clearly in the following slokas. There is some Sanskrit writing which I cannot read. The period of Satya Yuga is 4,000 years in duration. 400 years before and after Satya Yuga proper are its sandhis, or periods of mutation, with the preceding and the succeeding yugas respectively. Hence 4,800 years in all is the proper age of Satya Yuga. In the calculation of the period of other yugas and yuga sandhis, it is laid down that numerical 1 should be deducted from the numbers of both thousands and hundreds which indicated the periods of the previous yugas and sandhis. From this rule, it appears that 3,000 years is the length of Treta Yuga, and 300 years before and after are its sandhis, the period of mutation, which makes a total of 3,600 years. So 2,000 years is the age of Dwapara Yuga, with 200 years before and after as its sandhis, a total of 2,400 years. Lastly, 1,000 years is the length of Kali Yuga, with 100 years before and after as its sandhis, a total of 1,200 years. Thus, 12,000 years, the sum total of all periods of these four yugas, is the length of one of the Daiba yugas, or electric couple, two of which, i.e. 24,000 years, make the electric cycle complete. 100,000 of such Daiba yugas is the day of Brahma, the creative power or creator, when creation exists in a manifested state. The period equal to the above is its night, when this creative power sleeps and the creation is dissolved. From April 11th, 501 BC, when the autumnal equinox was on the first point of Aries, the sun began to move away from the point of its orbit nearest to the grand center towards the point farthest from it, and accordingly the intellectual power of man began to diminish. During the 4,800 years which the sun took to pass through one of the Satya couples, or 4/20th part of its orbit, the intellect of man lost altogether the power of grasping the spiritual knowledge. During the 3,600 years following, which the sun took to pass through the descending Treta Yuga, the intellect gradually lost all power of grasping the knowledge of divine magnetism. During the 2,400 years next following, while the sun passed through descending Dwapara Yuga, the human intellect lost its power of grasping the knowledge of electricities and their attributes. In 1,200 more years, during the year AD 499, the sun had passed through the descending Kali Yuga and had reached the point in its orbit which is farthest from the grand center. The autumnal equinox was on the first point of Libra. The intellectual power of man was so much diminished that it could no longer comprehend anything beyond the gross material of creation. The period around AD 500 was thus the darkest period of Kali Yuga and of the whole cycle of 24,000 years. History indeed bears out the accuracy of these ancient calculations of the Indian rishis and records the widespread ignorance and suffering in all nations at that period. From AD 499 onwards, the sun began to advance towards the grand center, and the intellect of man started gradually to develop. During 1100 years of the ascending Kali Yuga, which brings us to AD 1599, the human intellect was so dense that it could not comprehend the electricities, sukshmabhuta, the fine matters of creation. In the political world also, generally speaking, there was no peace in any kingdom. Subsequent to this period, when the 100-year transitional Sandhi of Kali Yuga set in to effect a union with the following Dwapara Yuga, men began to notice the existence of fine matters, the attributes of 5 electricities, Pancha Tun Matra, and political peace began to be established. About AD 1600, William Gilbert discovered magnetic forces and observed the presence of electricity in all material substances. In 1609, Kepler discovered important laws of astronomy, and Galileo produced a telescope. In 1621, Drebbel of Holland invented the microscope. About 1670, Newton discovered the law of gravitation. Thomas Savery made use of a steam engine in raising water about 1700. 20 years later, Stephen Gray discovered the action of electricity on the human body. In the political world, people began to have respect for themselves, and civilization advanced in many ways. England, united with Scotland, became a powerful kingdom. Napoleon Bonaparte introduced his new legal code into southern Europe. America won its independence, and Europe was peaceful in many ways. With the advance of science, the world began to be covered with railways and telegraphic wires. By the help of steam engines, electric machines, and many other instruments, fine matters were brought into practical use, although their nature was not clearly understood. After 1899, on the completion of the period of 200 years of Dwapara Sandhi, the time of mutation, the true Dwapara Yuga of 2,000 years will commence and will give to mankind in general a thorough understanding of the electrical attributes. Such is the great influence of time which governs the universe. No man can overcome this influence except he who, blessed with pure love, the heavenly gift of nature, becomes divine, being baptized in the sacred stream pranava, the holy Om vibration. He comprehends the kingdom of God. The position of the world in the Dwapara Sandhi era at present, AD 1894, is not correctly shown in the Hindu almanacs. The astronomers and astrologers who calculate the almanacs have been guided by wrong annotations of certain Sanskrit scholars, such as Kulu Bhatta, of the Dark Age of Kali Yuga, and now maintain that the length of Kali Yuga is 432,000 years, of which 4,994 have, in AD 1894, passed away, leaving 427,006 years still remaining, a dark prospect, and fortunately one not true. The mistake crept into the almanac for the first time about 700 BC, during the time of Raja Parikshita, just after the completion of the last descending Dwapara Yuga. At that time, Maharaja Yudhisthira, noticing the appearance of the dark Kali Yuga, made over his throne to his grandson, the said Raja Parikshita. Maharaja Yudhisthira, together with all the wise men of his court, retired to the Himalaya mountains, the paradise of the world. Thus there was none in the court of Raj Parikshita who could understand the principle of correctly calculating the ages of the several yugas. Hence, after the completion of the 2,400 years of the then current Dwapara Yuga, no one dared to make the introduction of the dark Kali Yuga more manifest by beginning to calculate from its first year and to put an end to the number of Dwapara years. According to this wrong method of calculation, therefore, the first year of Kali Yuga was numbered 2401, along with the age of Dwapara Yuga. In AD 499, when 1,200 years, the length of the true Kali Yuga, was complete, and the sun had reached the point of its orbit farthest from the grand center, when the autumnal equinox was on the first point of Libra in the heavens, the age of Kali in its darkest period was then numbered by 3,600 years instead of by 1,200. With the commencement of the ascending Kali Yuga, after AD 499, the sun began to advance in its orbit nearer to the grand center, and accordingly the intellectual power of man started to develop. Therefore, the mistake in the